Thank you very much for this opportunity to come in front of you and present some information that we are just completing right now as we continue to try and understand immune responses during the post-stress periods in both beef and dairy cattle. I believe we're at a time now where we're going to be, where we're going to be redefining immune suppression. Those of you who were at the symposium yesterday, let's see if I can get that off of there. There we go. That were at the symposium yesterday saw kind of the start with some of our papers we published last year looking at postpartum immune suppression and how our research is beginning to indicate that part of what we've measured as systemic postpartum immune suppression is immune shifting to the local immune system, in particular respiratory, reproductive, and mammary gland. Work coming out of Michigan State is showing the very similar thing with some of the work they're doing postpartum the dairy cow and the days postpartum, showing immune shift in the mammary gland, similar to what we're seeing. As we published those papers, the questions started to come up, well, does this shifting that we're beginning to measure also appear post-stress in beef cattle? And as all of you are well aware, as we look at post-stress immune suppression in cattle, whether it be post-transit stress, whether it be postpartum stress, lots of articles have been published looking at the impact of immune suppression that occurs after these stresses occur. However, if you take a look in the literature, all these studies have measured the systemic immune system. None of these have looked at the local immune system and determined what is the impact of stress on this local immune system. And so this is the experimental design. We have 25 calves per group. These were all from a single source so that we kept a lot of the variability of viral movement in these cattle. They were at the same facility for our research. We broke them into 3 groups randomly. They were blocked by day of birth, by sex, and then randomly assigned to one of 3 groups. And we were using work that had been published previously out of Buiatrics and Rixenhard, followed up by work from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, in which we were looking at both systemic IgG, serum neutralizing, and ELISA antibodies, also looking at ELISA for IgA against BHV1 and BRSV, and also looking at alpha, beta, and gamma interferon. We used as our stimulation here an intranasal herpes virus vaccine. The intranasal herpes virus has been shown in multiple studies to be able to induce a local immune response that includes both IgA as well as interferon and other nonspecific immune modulators. So this is a graphic. 1/3 of the calves were left at the home facility. The other 2/3 of the calves are put onto trucks. They're randomly driven for 6 hours. They're unloaded at a different facility and maintained in pens there for approximately 3 hours, and then reloaded back into the trucks, driven around for another 3 hours, and brought back to our research facility. What we're trying to do is look not just at transit. Some of the new articles are saying that the transit by itself is a stress, but if we add more stressors onto that, unloading, reloading, strange facilities, that we increase the immune suppression. And so in our experimental design, we are trying to recreate a multitude of different stresses occurring over a very short period of time to these calves to begin to look at this local immune system. 24 hours after trucking, the group that was left at home was administered the intranasal vaccine. The group that, and 1/2 the calves that had been trucked were also administered that intranasal vaccine. The 3rd group was left as a control group that we could then see if we could pick up some natural shifting of this immune system beyond what we could determine by looking at immune responses to herpes viruses and BRSV. So quick review, what do we measure in this thing? These are slides compliments of Dr. Amelia Willems, one of my co-investigators. I want to make sure I give her credit for these slides. As just a very brief review, IgA is our primary antibody in the upper respiratory passages of cattle and gets stimulated at fairly consistent levels after intranasal vaccination. We looked at 3 different interferons. If you remember that the type 1s, alpha beta interferon, released very quickly. Alpha interferon primarily when cellular infections occur by viruses. Beta interferon produced primarily by fibroblasts. Primary effect of the type 1 interferons are going to be antiviral, but they also do have secondary effects of immune regulation, some of that of which was expanded upon yesterday by Dr. Shingo's presentation. If we also look then at the type 2s, primarily gamma interferon, this is where a lot of the work has gone looking at gamma interferon. You heard Dr. Behringer just mention gamma interferon. This is produced by a whole host of cells. Their primary goal is not antiviral, but actually immunoregulatory, with a secondary effect of being antiviral. And so we measured all these, the way that we did this was by obtaining both nasal swabs and also nasal fluid from these calves on multiple days pre-vaccination and then post-stress and post-vaccination. This is taking a look at our neutralizing antibodies for IgG for BHV1. If you look here, you'll see that we have a statistically significant difference between the calves that were not vaccinated and the calves that were vaccinated. So we got a good take of vaccine. No difference between the unstressed calves and the calves that had been trucked and put under strong stress. Opposite of what occurs systemically when we begin to see within 24 hours after that stress decreases in the immune response. Even though there's no significant differences, you see the trend here towards having actually an increase in the response in those calves that were stressed when compared to those animals that were left unstressed upon vaccination. If we look at BRSV, a little bit more dramatic. One of the things that we've seen in our studies that we have not been able to explain over the years is that often when we put calves that are seronegative for BRSV into a stressful trucking situation, that a percentage of those animals will seroconvert to bovine respiratory syncytial virus, even though we've not been able to detect or isolate or on PCRs find BRSV. We're not sure what causes that. Our belief is that there's probably a low level, maybe even a latency that occurs with BRSV in some of these calves. We see here that we do get some increase in seroconversion in our control group, fairly low. If you take a look at what happens in our vaccine groups, we have increased BRSV IgG as well. And once again, although not statistically significant differences between our vaccines unstressed and our vaccines shipped, we do see the higher level numerically, once again, as we take a look at those calves that were vaccinated post-transit. Again, opposite of what's been published in the literature. We are still undergoing our analysis of the interferons. I'm going to show you our alpha interferon data. The gamma interferon we are redoing using some of the commercial kits with nasal secretions. We've actually had to each time go through a few minor adjustments as we try to use those kits on nasal secretions, making sure our dilutions are right, et cetera. But one of the things that's become clear out of our studies is that while we talk about interferon being this wonderful immune stimulator, that it appears from our research that if animals overshift, if they have too high of a level of interferon, that we see decreases in response to antibiotics, increase in severity of respiratory disease, increase in our mortality rates. We also see it at the other end if we don't get a high enough shift. We don't know what that correct shift is. That's part of what we're trying to understand out with our research is what is the right amount of gamma interferon in these calves that stimulates protection and helps that immune system with not being overstimulating. And so stay tuned because we have traditionally thought interferon is a good thing. Our research saying yes, it is if it's at the right levels, but we don't really know what those right levels are currently. But if you take a look here at, can I go back up? Maybe not, there we go. If we take a look what happened to these calves, you'll find that the calves that were unstressed and vaccinated had the lowest level of alpha interferon. Our calves that were vaccinated post-stress are in the intermediate levels of interferon. The calves that were unvaccinated actually had the highest level of alpha interferon, even though there was no obvious viral exposure that we had in those calves. We believe this is part of that indication that there is a natural shifting towards that local immune system. In our early analysis of the beta and gamma interferon, we see very similar things in that the shifting is the highest in unvaccinated calves. indicating that if they're unstressed, we don't modulate that immune response, that it drives even stronger locally, and that the intranasal vaccinations may temper it and maybe drive towards that closer level of balance that we want here. We're seeing very similar results with our IgAs. We're currently redoing our IgA for the BRSV component, so I don't have those slides to show you today. Those should be done within the next 6 weeks. So if we take a look in summary at these studies, what we believe we're beginning to see is a redefinition of post-stress immune suppression. We have documented and published it last year in our studies in dairy cows postpartum. We are now beginning to see the exact same thing as we look at the post-trucking cattle, that we will see a difference in that immune response when they're vaccinated locally post-stress than unstressed cattle. Opposite of what we've traditionally been taught, that we want to vaccinate unstressed cattle. The big question that we don't know at this point in time is, although that immune response may be higher post-stress, is our timing wrong? So for our disease resistance, is that lower response in that unstressed animal ahead of stress more protective than the higher response that's occurring after stress has occurred? Part of one of the studies that we've got going right now in 4,400 cows is looking at that timing of that administration to see whether or not there's a trade-off between timing and that higher immune response that may give us even more information on how we time try to look at this local shifting that occurs. If we try to figure out where this thing is going to go, I think this explains part of why immune modulation traditionally has not worked well in cattle, because we always try to use an injectable immune modulator during these periods of stress. If this immune system is trying to shift locally, we are stopping some of that shift from occurring with our systemic immune modulators. And as we look at the studies that have been published with immune modulation in both dairy cattle and in beef cattle, they have been unremarkable in their consistency. Often we've had to cover some of the deficiencies with antibiotics. And in some studies, local diseases like metritis have increased. It may be because we've looked at immune modulation incorrectly in these animals, and we need to work with this natural shifting. I believe as we do more work and our studies continue to show this immune shifting, that will give us new insights into how to work in these post-stress periods in both dairy cattle and beef cattle to try to improve not only vaccine response, but more importantly, natural immunity in these animals to limit our use of antibiotics, our need for antibiotics in these animals, as we can improve this local immune system and work with the shifting. Thank you.